All right, and we're back at Freedomizer Radio with a very special guest today, folks. Lord Christopher Monckton, the 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brinchley, Chief Science Advisor to the Science and Public Policy Institute, former Science Advisor to Margaret Thatcher, and in my book, Champion of Freedom Worldwide. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Monckton.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's the pleasure is all mine. It was such a thrill last time that I interviewed you. I told everybody after you signed off what a fun guy you are just to be around. That's usually when you think of talking to somebody that has a title or something, you kind of get a bit apprehensive. But you're a really cool cat, man, and we really appreciate that.
I've never been called a cool cat before. I like the sound of that.
So, Mr. Monckton, last we spoke was the day you returned from Copenhagen, and I tell you, I was doing pump fists and hoots, and I was pretty happy that we kind of handed it to them at Copenhagen. And through recent research, I've seen that it looks like they're trying to do it to us again, and I thought you could give us the basics on that real quick.
Certainly, yes. In Bonn, in the first week of April, they're going to call another special meeting 8 months ahead of schedule, which should have taken place in Cancun in Mexico at the end of December, but they've brought it right forward by 8 months so as to try to get all the negotiating done, and then they'll sign it in triumph in Cancun. And of course, what they will be signing is another great chunk of our freedom taken away. In fact, this will be our freedom taken away completely, because they will be trying once again to get the World Government Treaty back on the agenda. It won't quite be the appalling treaty draft they were trying to do before they went to Copenhagen, which was explicitly going to set up a dictatorial world government with enormous powers of taxation, regulation of economics, regulation of the environment in every one of those 192 states, regardless of what the elected governments in those countries thought. They're no longer going to get away with that in one go. They're going to try and do it by stealth instead. They're going to try and do it step by step. The first step's already been put in place at Copenhagen with the so-called Copenhagen Green Fund. And the purpose of that is to start building up money, which will of course not be spent on anything green at all. It'll be spent on the first layers of bureaucracy, which will eventually form the world government. And then as they manage to get people used to the idea of paying ever more of their taxes towards the world government, so it will grow in much the same way as the European Union's dictatorship grew by stealth, until suddenly the democratic countries of Europe found that they weren't democratic anymore, and that they were run by an alien dictatorship of commissars, that's the official German name for them, whom they didn't elect, can't hold to account, can't question, can't remove, and can't replace. And that's the aim now, to make the European Union the example, but this time to do it on a global scale, and do it as the European Union did by stealth, so that each little step towards dictatorship won't seem very big. And the mainstream media, who are dictatorship-minded anyway, they hate democracy, they have a contempt for what ordinary people think, they will drift along with this, because they have drunk deeply of the Kool-Aid, they believe in the whole global warming nonsense. And what is paradoxical about all this is that just at the point where the people have finally realized what nonsense global warming is, just at the point where the science has utterly collapsed, where even if the science hadn't collapsed, every economist except one is saying what nonsense it is and there's no point in doing anything about it. The damage you do will far outweigh any benefit you achieve. At that very point, where there is no longer any shred of a case for doing anything about global warming, and where nobody believes there's any point in doing anything about global warming, at this very point, here we are, the same old tired process again, the world government wannabes of the UN and the big banks and the big commercial companies, hoping to make their fortunes at the expense of the little guy. But I will be there in Bonn to stop them.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. We need more folks like you out doing it. Without you out championing this cause, because really you've become the face of the legitimate science when it comes to climate science around the world. And I watched your recent presentation that you did down in Australia. I thought it was rather funny, the analogy you gave for when the Scottish introduced you as the Viscount Monckton of Brenchley. I thought that made me chuckle outwardly.
Oh yes, the Scottish accent, it makes it come out. Will yous welcome the vacant Monckton? And, I'm always happy to be introduced outside Scotland, yes.
Yeah, that cracked me up. But one of the things that you showed that was really incredible were the slides of the weather stations. I believe it was either in the North or South Pole. Is that correct, where they were? And they've been talking about this massive loss of ice. And of course, here this station is that it shows it when it was in use. I guess it's now out of use.
Yes, these were two of the dew line early warning radar stations that the United States used to have on the northern scarp of Greenland, almost at the summit of the Greenland ice sheet. And of course, what you see is the snow and firn and ice building up all around these stations. Previously, of course, in order to work, they had to stand entirely proud of the ice. They had to stand above it. Now, the ice has almost buried them. And it's not just because they're sinking, because they're heavier than the ice is, and the ice is elastic. It's mainly this build-up of snow and ice around them, which, of course, is the complete opposite of what you're reading in the mainstream media. They're telling you that Greenland is collapsing into the sea and all the glaciers are receding. Of course, it hasn't occurred to them that if the glaciers are receding, then the ice can't be pouring into the sea. But anyway, the point is that what happens, the argument they use is if the glacier is receding, this is because it's melting because of global warming. If it's advancing, then that's because it's being lubricated by all that melting ice and it's running still faster into the sea. Either way, one thing is very clear from that picture from the top of the Greenland ice sheet, comparing those two dew line stations today with what they looked like 40 years ago, is that there is a very considerable continuing accumulation of snow and ice on Greenland. So all this talk of melting is completely inappropriate. And indeed, that confirms the result of the most accurate survey done of the Greenland ice sheet. It was done between 1992 and 2003 by Johannessen et al. He's a Danish physicist. And the results were published in 2005 in a learned journal. And they show that throughout that time, for 11 straight years, every year, the Greenland ice sheet across its vast mass got thicker, on average, by 2 inches per year. That's nearly 2 feet in just over a decade.
Yeah, and the same thing is also true for all the pictures that they've shown of the melted polar ice caps. I've seen more recent pictures where all that ice is returned, but I've only seen them on the alternative media sites, and of course I saw it in your slide presentation as well. Can you explain to people exactly what has actually occurred with the polar ice caps?
Most certainly I can, yes. Now, as you know, very widely reported in the mainstream media was the fact that for just a few weeks only, at the summer sea ice minimum extent in September of 2007, mid-September, there was around a quarter less ice than there would usually be at that time of year over the last 30 years since we've been able to watch the whole ice sheet by using the satellites. They've only been available to us for 30 years, so we've only got a 30-year record anywhere. And this was the lowest ice extent in 30 years. There was a huge fuss about it, and this was all because of global warming. Al Gore wet himself. Everybody was terribly upset about it. Lots and lots of moaning, and people saying, here you are, we told you so. All those skeptics didn't know what they were talking about. However, the following year, 2 things happened. First of all, half of the missing ice came back at the summer minimum. And the following year, 2009, all of it came back. And so now we have the same amount of ice at the Arctic, even in the summer minimum, as we have always had pretty much throughout the last 30 years. And this is quite clear from the satellite images, which I download straight off the satellite. So I displayed 3 of those images, 2007, September 15th, 2008, 2009, side by side, with the Arctic ice cap colored in purple, so you could see it very clearly. And you could see quite clearly the ice coming back over those 2 years. And of course, with this very cold winter we've just had, the ice is has been restoring itself very, very rapidly and also getting thicker. So all that stuff you hear about, yes, but it may have the same area, but it really isn't so thick underneath anymore, all of that is no longer true either. That's the Arctic. Now, if we go to the Antarctic, just 3 weeks after that Arctic 30-year sea ice minimum that everybody reported, get this, there was a 30-year Antarctic sea ice maximum. There was more sea ice in the Antarctic than at any time since the satellites first began keeping a record 30 years ago. But that record-breaking maximum of sea ice in the Antarctic was not reported, as far as I know, in any mainstream news medium. So what you had was, in the same month, practically, you had, certainly within 3 weeks of each other, you had a sea ice minimum in the Arctic known to have been caused by an unusual circulation of wind and